Following a minimalist lifestyle has a lot of benefits. And what could be wrong with being more mindful about what you buy and spending less? Well, minimalism, like a lot of other things, isn't without its faults. And if we don't keep an eye on these things, minimalism can actually be counterproductive, not only for our environments that we live in, but also our well-being. The first thing I wanted to talk about was analysis paralysis. I've tied myself up in mental knots trying to figure out if something that I'm looking to buy is more of a want as opposed to a need. And then if I decide that it is a want, I then go through the process of asking myself whether I still should buy it. And now I don't believe minimalism should be about depriving ourselves. I don't think that wanting things is wrong, but I do think it can get out of hand if we keep buying things that we don't really end up needing and they sit around gathering dust. So that being said, there are times where I do buy things that I want that I'm really happy with. I get a lot of use out of them and they add a lot of positivity to my life. But it can take a lot of mental gymnastics for me to get there. And sometimes I'm not sure whether making some of these decisions should be really as difficult. And that brings me on to the next thing, which is guilt and shame. But there have been times where I felt a lot of guilt because I've bought something I wanted and it's turned out I've not used it half as much as I thought I would. And the problem I found with getting caught up in guilt or shame about things is that those feelings often take us away from thinking about what we could do differently next time. So this time we've made a mistake. We've bought something that it turns out we're not using or we're not going to use to its full potential. People make mistakes, we're human. But beating ourselves up over it, making ourselves feel bad, telling ourselves that we're a bad person for that, it doesn't think about the lessons we can learn from that situation and what we can do differently in the future. So I do think it's important to learn where we've gotten wrong and what drove us to buy a particular item. Now for me, one of my big drivers, if I buy something and perhaps it's more of an impulse buy, is the fear of missing out. So if an item is on sale or if it's like a one-time deal that apparently is never going to come around ever again, then I get the fear that I'm going to miss out on that item and I may very well buy it. So that is my trigger, if you like, the fear of missing out. And you might have that same trigger, or it may be a different trigger for you. Maybe you tend to buy things when you feel low in mood, when you feel a bit fed up, when maybe things in life aren't going the way you'd like them to go. You know, buying things can be a comfort for people. And once you know more of what your triggers are, then you can look out for them and stop yourself from making an impulse purchase that you might regret. But if you do find yourself feeling a lot of guilt or shame, think about what you would say to a friend who's in the same situation. This friend has bought an item on impulse, or they've bought an item and not ended up using it and they feel really bad, they feel really guilty and ashamed. What would you say to that friend? How would you support them? And this is a useful technique because often we're far more kind and compassionate and understanding of our friends and their problems than we are to ourselves. So if you think about what you would say to a friend, try then to apply that to your own situation and see how that feels. So the third toxic aspect of minimalism that I've come across is becoming too rigid. Now this was more of something that happened at the beginning of my practicing minimalism, but it does still creep in now and then. There are times where I can be too rigid about the things that I'm thinking about buying. Now if it's something I need, like food or toiletries, essentials, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But it's when it comes to that, is this a want or a need question again? And so something that I've gotten back into recently is books. Now I studied for many years, and the thing with studying is you don't read books cover to cover when you're studying. You tend to pick out the bits you need. And I think that, and probably combined with social media and the attention span needed for social media, has really made it difficult for me to get back into books and sit with them for any length of time. But more recently, especially over the festive period when I had time to sit around, I made it my mission during the festive period to sit and read, and I absolutely loved it. So there are quite a lot of books that I want to purchase because I want to continue with my reading. I want to spend less time on social media. I want to use my time outside of work doing something that is genuinely adding something to my life, and I feel that I'm learning so much through my reading. But it's been really difficult to allow myself to buy books. Now I do try and buy secondhand books where I can. Also, I have thought about investing in a Kindle to save on space because I don't want to end up in the position I was before we moved into this home where I had probably hundreds of books and they'd sat there for years. But I'm being very careful with my book purchases. I'm trying to avoid buying books on a whim, on an impulse. And so I have a few books lined up that I'm going to read and not buy any more until I've read them, which is really difficult because I keep seeing books that I really want. So although being rigid isn't necessarily a healthy thing if it's to the extreme, I do think it's helped me to be more mindful about my book purchases in particular and not going back into old habits. So this next point is, I've called it when minimalism turns cold. Now, I see a lot of minimalist aesthetic, which gives off a rather clinical feeling. So lots of white, really light colours, clean lines, very minimal furniture. It looks nice, but it looks quite cold. It doesn't look very well lived in. And for me, my home is my sanctuary. It's a place I come back to after a day at work where I can rest and recuperate and get cozy. I spend a lot of quality time here with my husband and with Tala, who's laying down there, by the way. I don't want to sit in a sterile environment devoid of any warmth. It sounds a bit cheesy, but I want my home to feel like a hug, like it's hugging me. So at the start of my minimalist journey, I had been determined to keep my home as minimal as possible. When we moved, we had furniture that we needed to buy, but we deliberately didn't overbuy. We didn't want to fill every single corner of the house, and I'm glad we approached it that way. Especially when we moved in and there wasn't a lot in here, it felt a bit too clinical. It didn't feel homely. And then at some point in time, I came across the concept of cozy minimalism or warm minimalism, and this felt much more aligned with my sense of how I wanted my home to be. And plus, when we got Tala, the idea of having much minimalism in this room in particular has gone straight out of the window, because she has got her sofa over there with all her toys and her blankets, and I would not want to take anything of that away from her. But at the same time, I don't want the home to become so cluttered that it looks a mess. I want it to look homely, but without feeling hemmed in. So if you'd like some tips on creating a home that is warm and cozy but minimalist, then check out the video that's on the screen. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.